In this episode, I have the pleasure of interviewing Tiquette Bramlett. And if you've spent any time around her, you quickly realize that she is one of the most enjoyable people to be around. And despite her unwillingness to talk about it, she also has an impressive list of accomplishments and awards, including being the first Black woman to run a winery in the country, making US Today's list of Women of the Year in 2023, being named one of Portland Business Journal's 2023 Woman of Influence, and she won 2023's Wine Country Award for Chehalem Valley Chamber of Commerce. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, and I'm not going to get into all of the other awards that she's won. Tiquette also founded Our Legacy Harvested, which is a nonprofit serving the BIPOC community within the wine industry, and she also currently serves as the vice president of Chosen Family Wines. So we have a lot to talk about as we learn more about Tiquette's background, how she got into the wine industry, her passion behind Our Legacy Harvested, and what it means to make each other our business. Hi, I'm Daniel Roberts, host of the Giving Town podcast, where we share stories of hope and generosity in Newberg and the surrounding areas. We live in an amazing community full of incredible people who are always working to make Newberg an even better place to live. And this podcast is all about sharing those stories and helping the people in our town be inspired, get involved, and have hope for our future. This podcast is also brought to you by my real estate team, the Joyful Roberts Group, and it's also part of our mission to serve this community, not only by providing amazing service to our clients, but by helping Newberg be an even better place to live. So if you're looking to buy or sell a home anywhere around Newberg, reach out to us and we'll be happy to serve you. Well, thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this episode with Tiquette Bramlett. All right, well, Tiquette, I am looking forward to interviewing you today. I like when people laugh. It's fun. It makes it nice to just not be so serious all the time.
Exactly. You don't have to always be serious. Yeah.
So I can tell from the first few minutes before we started recording, just laughing at random things is fun. So anyway, but we're not here to talk about laughing and random doom scrolling. So you've been, you've kind of received a lot of, I don't know what the word is, awards, I guess. That's the recognition for what you've done through Our Legacy Harvested and really being, as far as what most people can tell, the first Black woman to own to run
appointed to run a winery, yeah.
And whenever I see those, I'm always like, because I've seen so many different things where people make claims, I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's true. And on other podcast, I actually I made a mistake because one person thought that it was the first of this other thing, and someone's like, oh no, the first person who did this was actually this person. So I'm always as far as we can tell.
Right, exactly, exactly.
But it was funny because I was looking up on, when I was just doing research, Wine Country Award winner for Chehalem Valley Chamber of Commerce. I know you probably hate this, but USA Today's Woman of the Year in 2023, Portland Business Journal. I won't read all of them, but is your wall, do your shelves, get weighed down?
No, so fun fact, my parents actually have all of my awards. Okay. I do not keep them. The only one that I have kept is the Portland Business Journal one, because never in my life did I ever think that I would be getting an award from a business journal, anything. Yeah. So that was a really fun treat and a really nice, ode to my grandfather who always believed in that. So yeah.
It's funny being, not that I've received tons of awards, but realizing a resume can look very padded.
Yes.
Not that I'm saying yours is padded or that, obviously I believe you deserve all of those, but it doesn't change who you are.
Right.
And I can tell you're a very down to earth person. It's not hi, my name's Tiquette. Look at all these.
That's the most uncomfortable thing ever. No.
Well, thanks for being a good sport about it. But I wanted to, for our audience, I know we're not just going to joke around the entire time.
I know.
But how did you first get involved in the wine industry? So kind of share your story of were you a little girl who said, when I'm older, I want to get into wine?
Oh, God.
How did this all come about?
I like to say that wine found me, honestly. It's always been surrounding my family, but we've never been directly involved. And when I was in college, I was a vocal performance major. So singing opera, that was the thing. So happened to end up in places where a lot of wine was made. There was a lot of history in those spaces. And especially for our master classes, they would make us go to restaurants and sing for our supper. And rather than paying attention to the other students that were singing, I was looking at the wine list and always being like, can we talk about regions? Like, why do you have it sectioned off like this? And I'm asking questions, and my instructor's like, hey, can you pay attention to getting ready to sing, please? Thank you. But wine was just always around, and I was fascinated by it, and I was fascinated by the history of it, right? The fact that generations of families were involved in this, the fact that an entire community would come together and participate in harvest. I found that story and that picture of community very fascinating, and then was always trying to figure out why it felt disjointed in the New World, where it didn't exactly feel like you had that type of history here.
Yeah.
So there was always that curiosity. And then post-college, I got diagnosed with cancer. So I got benched for a little bit from singing. Mine was thyroid cancer, so all surrounding my vocal cords. So while I was undergoing treatment, my parents and my infusion nurses that were amazing kept saying, like, you always talk about wine while you're getting your infusions. Why don't you take a look at this book? And it was the Wine Bible. And I started reading the Wine Bible, and it was just so enlightening. And for me, it read like a novel, right? It's like I really appreciated the storytelling behind it. So while I was finishing up treatment, my mom kept saying, like, once you get cleared, maybe something to think about is getting your psalm certification and just figuring out what you want to do with it. And I was like, well, no, I know I still want to sing. Like, that's going to be my thing. And she was like, okay, but just so you can have something else, which I always give my parents, just a side note, like, so much credit for this, because they let their daughter go to college for singing. And then after that, let me keep thinking about something even more creative and get into the wine industry, right? And we're completely supportive of everything that I wanted to do. So I think that I always love to give them credit and props for that, because in college, even though I had a full ride for music, they said, if you want to explore something else, go ahead. So I was able to tack on another major, and I did that, I think, to honor my parents, and be like, look, I've got that extra security. And they're like, you don't need it. Like, you're fine. And I was like, okay. But went through all of that, experienced that. And at the end, when I was ready to transition out of music and get into wine, I started talking to my instructors and say, like, I'm trying to figure out what direction I want to go. I think I want to consult with restaurants and things. And they were like, you like experience, you like community, you like getting your hands dirty and providing a really intimate experience for people. I think you really might like working at a winery, because you can do everything. And I was like, oh, okay, well, let me think about where I would want to land. And my instructor was always saying, he goes, I'm not telling you that you need to move to Oregon. I'm just letting you know that every blind tasting that you did, you gave Oregon the highest markings. And I'm going to leave that there. Like, do with that what you will with that information. And came up here to visit a family friend, stayed for the weekend, and just said, let me just put some resumes out there and see what happens and where I go from there. And that weekend, I ended up getting hired at a winery, and I called my parents, and I was like, I think I'm moving to Oregon. They were like, what? So a month later, I moved up here. I thought that it was just going to be a 6-month adventure of really just getting my hands dirty and really having the opportunity to learn and then move on to another place. Got brought on full time in that space and stayed at that winery for 5 years, and then slowly just started exploring and looking at other wineries and growing and learning with them as well. And now I'm 9 years in living in Oregon, which is really crazy to say, but yeah.
So did you get your psalm certification?
I did.
Okay.
I did.
What is that experience like?
It was, for me, really incredible, because I did not appreciate how sensitive my palate was until I got into this class. I was the only one in my class who was not in the wine industry.
Okay.
So listening to a lot of the descriptors that people were giving, I was always raising my hand and saying, like, how are you tasting that? And then my instructor would say, like, well, what are you tasting? I was like, I'm getting tangerine. I am getting these different notes. I'm getting honey, and it's a specific honey from where I grew up in this valley. Like, I'm tasting that because that honey has eucalyptus, and that's what it's reminding me of. And he was like, that's what taste is. It's experiential. It's what you grew up with. It's what you were constantly exposed to. And trying to impress the crowd with language or with descriptors that you've never tried before, that's a fool's errand.
You know, that's really interesting because I had a client who was one of the early wine managers in this region.
Yeah.
And very graciously explained to me a lot of the wine, like, hey, here's some things that you really should know if you're in the area. And because I started to realize, I kind of like wine. And this is not a story about me. I don't want to get too much into this.
Now it is. Go.
Now let's turn the camera back.
Yeah.
But anyway, I started to realize, like, there's different types of wine I like. And so I'm just now, I've actually been saying this for a couple years, I'm just now starting to recognize, I like, Cabernet Sauvignon, for example. Like, I like that. And I'm starting to recognize just like, what are the different wines?
Right.
But like the oak, like, it tastes oaky. It's like, I've never bit into an oak tree.
Right. Exactly. And it's those things where I always say, like, unless you're trying all of these wines side by side and being really intentional about learning the distinction between them, instinctively, you're not going to know that. You're just going to know that it tastes different, or your palate doesn't necessarily gravitate towards it. Yeah. That's why I always tell people when you are wine tasting, like, there's no wrong answer because your palate enjoys what it enjoys. Yeah. Right? So if you want to have something to sit at home and just drink, just crack open on a Tuesday night and sit back and relax with your people and just have a good night, that's okay. Yeah. Right? Like, there's no judgment in that space.
Yeah. And I bet people really appreciate that too, because like you said, when there can be, and I think less so in our area, Newberg is very down to earth generally. Yeah. But I think when many people think of the wine industry, they think of people who are very pretentious and they can 100%. Feel embarrassed. So I bet they appreciate having someone who can be very relatable, who may have a lot of experience and knowledge, but still not be like, oh, you're getting that wine?
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, and that's the whole thing. I think, if you pay attention when you're in tasting rooms, very often you'll hear a customer say, this may sound like a dumb question, but... And I always respond with, like, it's not a dumb question if you don't know. Like, and I'm like, if you don't know the answer, like, like, it's not a dumb question. Like, you're being curious. I like that you're being curious. Let's have the conversation about it. Yeah.
This may be a dumb question, but is this made from coconuts?
Exactly.
Okay, that is a dumb question.
I'll be like, respectfully, no. Like, but let's talk about it.
Okay, so from there, what was the next step in your journey to be at where you're at now, which is Chosen? What's the full, I'm forgetting the full name of
Chosen Family Wines.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was with Anime Vineyards for 5 years. I got such a strong foundation there, and I'd love to be able to say, like, I'm still in such close relationship with all the folks that I've worked with. And I think that that's also a beautiful thing that we have here in the Willamette Valley, where it is a lot of relationship driven, business, and being able to be in this space where I get to add to my family and not take away, I think is a beautiful thing that I have had in my experience here. At Anime, I started part-time, like I said, in the tasting room, and worked my way up to being brand ambassador for them. And then the infamous 2020 happened. And so when we weren't able to travel and do those things, and I was still immunocompromised, so I was actually on lockdown in California, and I was stuck down there for 4 months. Wow. Yeah, until I was able to get back up here. And it was, they kept supporting me. They kept me working on projects down there, and so was able to keep me employed. And then once I got back, I really started asking the questions of like, well, if I'm not going to be able to travel, what's the next step going to look like? And Bertoni Faustin and I have been great friends since I moved up here, and he's the first Black winemaker in Oregon. And we had an opportunity to connect, and I was telling him, like, I think I'm ready to take the next step in my career, and, you know, I don't know what that looks like. And he was actually opening a tasting space in downtown Portland and asked if I wanted to come and help open that and come onto his team. And from there, I always like to say, like, he really lit a fire under me in pushing me to go after the things that I wanted, you know, and saying, like, it's great that you're doing these things for others, but what do you want to do for yourself? Like, what do you want your life to look like? And really having that opportunity to ask myself that question during the pandemic when we were experiencing lockdown and going through that, it really gave me the time to sit and think and be intentional about what I wanted to build. And for me, community has always been everything. You know, my family wouldn't be who they are without community, and I wouldn't be who I am without mine. And for me, the biggest thing of while I was living up here is saying, like, I want to be able to build this community and build this bridge, and what would it look like? You know, like, how would I bring everybody into the fold for what I envision our space looking like up here?
Yeah.
And that's how our Legacy Harvested was built. I just slowly started working on that and getting ready to introduce that to the world. And then, when I was working for Bertoni, I met another couple that had taken over Vidon Vineyard, formerly Vidon, now Compris Vineyard. And they asked me if I wanted to come on as their president and run the winery. And I was there for about a year and 2 years. That was 2 years. Pandemic times, I lose all sense of timeline. I'm like, I don't even know what that was. It was 2 years. And then Channing asked if I wanted to come and help build Chosen Family Wines. Okay. So I've been with Chosen for about 7 months now.
Okay. So what is the timeline from when you were at
Anime?
I want to say Anime, but it's not. It's Anime. Get that right. So from there, so what was the timeline between that and our Legacy Harvested and like the different positions until Chosen Family Wines?
Yeah, so it's been a 7-year timeline. Okay. Yeah. So
because our Legacy Harvested was started in 2020.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. In the heart of 2020.
And so that's make sure I ask this question right. What made you decide? Other than what I know you were just kind of explaining some of the heart behind it, but what was like the main reason of like, okay, I want to actually do this and like actually make this a thing? Like what?
Yeah, I think during COVID and when the protests began, a lot of people were reaching out and saying, we want to support people of color that have small businesses. We want to support the BIPOC community that has small businesses. Where do we go? And I always appreciate the fact, like what we were talking about a little bit earlier, I always appreciate the fact when people come to me earnestly and say, I want to support, I don't know how, right? And like, I need that extra instruction. During that time, there were so many things happening where I also needed time, right? So it was like, I also recognize I can't be a resource for everyone, but I can provide a platform where you can now come and make those connections. And now there's no excuse. You have now had the opportunity to meet these people and build community in this space together. Yeah. And so a friend of ours got together and we were sitting and enjoying a bottle of rosé and checking in with each other and seeing how we were doing. And she was commenting on the same thing of saying a lot of people were reaching out and saying, how can we support BIPOC businesses in the community? And I said, well, why don't we have a block party and invite all the BIPOC businesses that we know from Portland, from the Valley, like as many as we can get from Oregon to come out and be a part of this. And we can provide a pamphlet with all of the businesses, with their contact information. People can come and shop and support these people all in one space, but also meet these people, right? You can meet and you can build community and connection with them, right? And I love being able to facilitate that experience, right? And saying like, we are going to have a good time. It doesn't always have to be a heavy experience. It doesn't always have to be really emotional, but it can be a joy-filled space. And all you're doing is supporting another human, right? And I think that that's always the thing to highlight. I'm like, that's literally how easy it is, right? So it's like, we set it up, and community showed up in spades, right? Like, it was a beautiful thing to witness, and hearing a lot of people say like, I had no idea that this business existed. And I'm like, right, now you do. So keep supporting them, right? You know, it's like, this is the moment. Like, and being able to see that evolve over the last 4 years, especially, watching the block party get bigger and more people coming out with intention to not only develop and meet and support these small businesses, but also figure out how they can partner with them and what their businesses can do together to leverage each other. That's all I've ever wanted, is for people to figure out how this can all work together.
You know, I think it's interesting because so many times we try to overcomplicate things. Mm-hmm. I'm public enemy number one.
Yeah.
But I've learned kind of, sometimes I go in the opposite direction of just throwing something together, just make it happen. Mm-hmm. And when you recognize and remember that everything is about relationships and building relationships, it doesn't have to be complicated. Food helps.
All the time. All the time.
But having simple things where people can come together and feel loved and supported, a lot of times you don't need a whole lot more than that. And it sounds like that's kind of what the angle you took.
100%. Because, I mean, when you know that you have community supporting you, there's a level of confidence and a level of safety that you feel in the space. Just as a person, right? You can step into any space. If you don't know anybody there, sometimes you're going to be on your heels a little bit, right? And you're looking around and saying, am I going to be supported in this space? Like, if something happens, is somebody going to support me? That's an important question to ask, right? Like, when we're walking into these larger spaces. But I think knowing that you can walk into this space and seeing community show up and people that you've never met before and saying like, not only am I going to support this business, but I'm going to support you. Like, what can we do to continue to get your brand out there? And just asking that question and knowing that it could end up in somebody's tasting room. It could end up in somebody's shop in a city that you never thought it would be in.
Yeah.
Like, those are beautiful moments, and it's empowering for people, right? Because you check yourself in that moment, and also reminded of just how much community does want to figure out how to work together, right? But sometimes we just have to be forced into the same space, like, to have that moment, you know?
So you had the block party, and a lot of people came. It was a big success. And then how did that turn into Our Legacy Harvested?
Yeah.
Or was it Our Legacy Harvested before that?
So the name was born after that. So so beforehand, we just wanted to put together a block party, have community come together, and just specifically, we wanted it in wine country so that people could be exposed to what's happening out here and just see how close we are to Portland, right? Like, how easy it is for people to get out here and vice versa, right? It's easy to communicate with each other. After that, I really started sitting and thinking about the fact that we did not have people of color feeling safe coming out into the industry and specifically coming out here. And that was always a troubling thing to me, because when people would find out that I lived out here, sometimes the first question would be, are you safe? I was like, yeah, I have community that supports me, right? You know, it's like, I have people that I know if something happens, I can go to them and say, this happened, right? And they will have my back in this moment to have the conversation. And looking around knowing I'm not the only person of color that likes wine. I'm not the only person of color that is in the wine industry, but there's not a lot of us in these spaces. What's the disconnect, right? And again, it's feeling as though that space is unattainable to you. Again, it's where I want to step in and be able to not be a facilitator, but just literally to bridge that gap and say, you can come into this space, you will be supported by community. We will make sure of that because you will not only have a team of people behind you, but you will have community support behind you. And here are the people in community that you know you can turn to. Knowing I could build that because of the relationships that I have developed over my time here in the industry and saying, these are people that I have trusted in these moments that I can turn to and know that they're going to support me. I know that they'll support you in turn. And they've always shown up for Our Legacy Harvested, for me, in spades every time. Like, I know that we can always depend on them. And for me, with Our Legacy Harvested, I knew that if we could bridge that gap specifically here in Oregon, because we've done such a great job of letting people know that we're a welcoming and inclusive place, I think figuring out how to take the action and saying, this is how we are, is what we're figuring out, right? But that's how we're figuring it out as community. And I think that that's the important thing of being able to have that conversation and say, this is how we're doing it. And me being able to talk to folks in the wine industry and saying, like, this is an opportunity that we want to be able to facilitate for every level of industry person that's interested in getting in or has been in for years but can't seem to get to that next step of getting a job at a winery. We want to be able to facilitate that, and we want the home base to be Oregon. Yeah. And everybody resonated with that.
So how does Our Legacy Harvested actually be that? Like, how does that tangibly work on a practical level?
Yeah, so we go through an application process for wineries and the individuals applying for the jobs at the wineries. And we interview the wineries, we interview the individuals, and basically like to ask the standard questions of like, what is your HR policy? What are people getting paid hourly? If an incident does arise, how do you support your employee? Like, in a lot of these basic things that do happen in spaces, a lot of this stuff, you know, will not necessarily be addressed in a way that is delicate to dealing with people of color, right? There is a level of sensitivity that you have to acknowledge when you're having certain conversations where you can make a person feel uncomfortable, right? And we have to acknowledge that. And if they are expressing that, that can't go unlooked, right? It's something that you have to be able to have that conversation. But sometimes you in the management position are not always qualified to. So who is that third party that comes in to mediate that situation? Yeah. Right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I grew up in a very conservative, even more rural than Newberg area. And there's this impression that, oh, you know, everyone just, you know, people make fun of each other and that's just how it is. Right. And as a white person, you don't know what it's like to be, I've never really been like not made fun of, but like I've never been like actually judged or discriminated or harassed for the color of my skin. So I don't really know what it's like, especially, you know, when people of color have a very long history of that. And so I think, it's, now when I recognize like, oh, and I was completely ignorant that until I was in college, I was completely clueless that racism was actually still a thing. Like I thought it was over. And I saw this video online of like, oh my gosh, people are still racist. I just didn't know. Yeah. And so I think if people think like, oh, you know, it's not a big deal, but now recognizing like, well, you're not really qualified to be able to say that because you don't know what it's like. And just tell someone that they're being too sensitive is not helpful. Right. So that's interesting. So for Our Legacy Harvested, do people come to you if they're like, hey, we want to get into the wine industry, and they come through you, and then you're kind of a connector between them and the wineries themselves?
That is correct. Okay. Yeah. So we have an application for individuals that are interested. And right now we start with the foundation of them working a harvest because it's labor intensive, right? You are working long days and some are very hard days, right? With what you're having to do. People are not always showing up as their best selves. And it's where we remind them as a person, sometimes you have to rise to the occasion, right? It's going to be a challenge. And it's also saying, how do we show up for each other in that moment, right? What do we do to prove to ourselves like we can get through this, or saying, or acknowledging the fact that this space is not for me. Again, there's no wrong answer, right? Because this is your individual journey.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you what you have to do. I want you to have agency over your own body, right? And being in those spaces, you watch something awaken in the person of, you watch that light bulb come on where all of a sudden they're understanding, witnessing it from vine to wine. They're understanding that process and figuring out what level of the industry they exactly want to be involved in. Because if they tell us that they're curious about something, we make sure to connect them with community that is involved in that particular thing, in that particular skill set, so they do have an opportunity to learn more. So it's not just about harvest, it's about encompassing community, right? So we always say, like, how can we connect them to as many people as possible so that when they leave us, they're now saying, well, I have all of these connections outwardly that I can go to. So OLH is not the focus. We are not the tip of the pyramid, right? Like, my goal is that OLH is not going to be a factor, right? That is always my wish of, like, we're just here to help give you a boost and get you into the door. After that, we're here. We're always going to be here to support you, right? But like, this is your journey and I want you to take ownership on that.
Yeah.
You know, so.
What is the significance of the name Our Legacy Harvested?
So it's based off of the African phrase from Mbutu. It's I am because we are. It's the foundation of my literal family. Like I said earlier, my parents and my grandfather are very community-oriented people. My grandfather was the first Black general contractor for California. And he dealt with his fair share of hardships in that space, especially being an interracial couple. It's like, I love the background drums.
I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, right. It's like,
you probably can't hear that on the podcast. Someone's making a lot of ruckus behind us.
It's getting exciting in here. But in his journey, and, you know, especially marrying a woman coming from another country, my grandmother is from Holland, and coming from that space, they came to the States in a time where their marriage wasn't recognized initially, right? So it was a challenging time, to say the least. And then, sorry, it's really funny. And then coming into a space. Not my grandfather's story is not funny. I'm sorry. It's like the noise happening in the background. It's very funny. So, like, very sorry. Broke my focus. Okay. Coming back.
I appreciate you.
Yeah. But coming into a space where he was going to be the first coming into this space and saying, where am I going to fit? What does this look like? But he had community come in and say, we're going to give you this chance to come and get your license and do this stuff. And when he decided to say he wanted to start his own business, people were like, no one is going to want to work with you. No one's going to let you hire any contractors. Like, this is not smart. And he was like, well, no, I'm definitely going to do it. Right. It was like he had that vision. And he founded Air Sheet Metal and proceeded to start bringing in people from surrounding community. It was a lot of men of color to start. It was a lot of men that were coming out of prison, looking for job placement.
In what year? Do you know what year this was?
He founded it in 1972.
Okay.
Yeah. And he started from there and giving these men opportunities and really teaching them the craft and getting them into the trade. And it's amazing because a lot of these men have their own businesses now. I am honored to say that I get to call them uncles, right? They're still a part of my family. They are people that I can use as a resource. 2 of them helped move me up here. They packed up a truck and moved me up here and helped me get settled in. I got to grow up witnessing that and witnessing what community looks like. And again, I think the biggest thing is always saying, like, no one is beholden to me. And even with my grandfather, he always said that, like, no one's beholden to him because he helped them, right, get started. He was like, watching you win and watching you go live your life, that's the win, right? And again, like, that's community. They knew that they could always go to my grandfather if times were troubling and they were trying to figure something out. They knew they could always go to him. And he would be able to say, yeah, go talk to this person. They can help you out. I'll give them a call. We'll get you connected. And it's being able to witness that. I always say, like, it's in my blood. And when I would ask him why he would put this extreme effort in when we were kids, because you'd watch him give so many hours to things. And we would ask him that, and he was like, it's our legacy harvested.
Yeah. It's really interesting. You use the word Ubuntu, and I only just learned about that word like 2 or 3 weeks ago. I met someone from South Africa who I'd already called a friend. They recently started going to our church, and just got to talking about, because he grew up there. Like, he had generations of living out there, and he met his wife down there. Anyway, our kids were playing together, and I just got to talking, and we actually got to talking about like apartheid and like deep stuff, which is like not common. That's earlier when we were talking before we started recording. I just always recognized, like, hey, I don't remember how the conversation brought up. It's like, hey, what's it like being
right?
But recognizing, like, hey, how does this work?
Right.
When I think it's actually Port Elizabeth is being renamed, and I don't remember what it's being renamed to. I'll butcher it if I try to pronounce it. But I asked about that, and like, is that like a lot of the pushback now that apartheid's over? Like, where segregation ended, 50, 60 years ago, whatever or was it 61? That's bad. Yeah. I need to know this.
Yeah.
61?
Yeah.
Okay. So 60 years ago.
Yeah.
Apartheid only
younger
ended,
than my dad.
and apartheid was only like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's crazy because they're now, like, there's a lot more that, like, it's much fresher for them.
100%.
But anyway, he was talking about this concept. That was kind of not even relevant. I just think it's fascinating where we're at in the world. I don't want to get too much down into that because it'll be a much longer podcast. But he shared about this phrase Ubuntu, which means that I am because you are, I am because we are. There's not really a direct translation, which is many of the things you talked about, which really is like, oh my gosh, that's what we crave in community. Like, that's what we need. And he said, a rough translation might be, I don't need a wheelbarrow because you have one.
100%.
I can go borrow it. I don't need to have every single, and I live in a neighborhood where there's like 100 homes all within, if you have a good arm, you could probably throw a rock into any of them. But I felt bad borrowing my neighbor's lawnmower.
Right.
And I felt like I need to get my own because I don't want to be a burden.
Right.
And asking, and there's just not, we don't do a relationship with our neighbors and community as much as I think happened in the past.
Yeah.
And it kind of made me sad, but also kind of a spark of hope. Like, how can we take Ubuntu and bring it here? Yeah. And so it was interesting when I saw on your tagline on the website, I am because we are, like, that sounds like that phrase. So you grew up with that, it sounds like.
We did. Yeah. I mean, everybody always laughs because the area that I grew up in, like, we always say our house and our neighbors and our family's homes, like, were revolving doors, right? Like, you always knew you could come to the house. And the running joke was like, when you opened the door, you never knew who was going to be on the other side of it, right? It was like, someone's going to be there, but it's like, there could be 20 people, there could be 2 people. But you, vice versa, always knew who you could turn to And it was never an inconvenience, right? It was always like, yeah, just come and kick it, right? It's just, we're here. If you need it, if you just don't want to take a nap on your couch and you want to take a nap on a different couch, the couch is there. Like, go ahead and make yourself comfortable. And it was very empowering to grow up in that space, right? Because you knew that you were safe. When I was getting ready to go to college, it was the first time my parents had to have that conversation with me of saying, not everybody believes what we believe. Not everybody carries this philosophy with them. Not everybody's going to respond well to it. You still need to stay true to who you are, right? And so regardless of the amount of people that would always say, that's ridiculous that you're doing that. It's ridiculous that you believe in that. Okay, I'm ridiculous. Like, it's like that's, yeah, you're right. I am ridiculous. I'm going to do it anyways.
Wow.
Right? And it's because I credit a lot of because of the foundation that I was given. And I knew, regardless of what was happening in that space, I still have community. I still have people that I can turn to and lean on and take the lessons, take the lickings, and still go there and say, how can we do that better next time? Right? Like, what can we do? And call in community and say, yeah, I don't have the answer. I need help from you guys.
Do you find that, and I where are we on time? We're at 40 minutes. Gosh. But I love this stuff. I mean, this is what I'm passionate about. I mean, the whole reason I do this podcast is ultimately I want to help foster a sense of community, sharing hope. And honestly, I think one of the things we need for hope and to really help our culture and society thrive is finding that sense of community again. Yeah. It's not Facebook.
No.
And arguing with people who you have no relationship with. I think that's something that is one of the worst things that has happened in our society of arguing, having the ability to argue without knowing a person well and knowing like, hey, if we're going to argue and disagree on things, at least I know that you care about me, you've got my back.
Yep.
But there's this culture. Anyway, I don't need to get into that. I think it's don't need to get into that. But having this sense of community where we can, and part of me is like, is it even possible to have that again, where we've become so individualistic and we're all in our own lives and we'd be a little put off if someone showed up to our door because we don't have that sense of community. And I think that sense of trust and relationship is needed first. So I'm curious, in moving to Oregon, most of the people who already lived here don't have that sense of Ubuntu, right? And so how did you find that, or did you help create that? What was that like?
I like to think that I sought it out, right? And found the people that also believed in it, right? And just leaned in. I always say it's like you have to test the waters, right? And see what it's about. I mean, the first few years, admittedly, I was not committed to Oregon. Like, I was like, I'm not going to stay here, you guys. I'm here to learn, and I'm going to move on and keep exploring and doing all the things. Like, I'm not moving to Oregon. I'm here temporarily. That was the thing. That was my tagline. So I kept relying on my community in California, and I would fly home every other month, right? I would go home, I'd spend some time down there, I would be around my community, get fueled back up, and come back in for the fight. And it just grew frustrating. And it was my grandfather that called me out, and he was like, what are you doing to find community up there? And I'm like,
why are you here?
Exactly. And I was like, well, I'm working and I'm doing this stuff. And he's like, so you don't have time to talk to people? Like, I don't understand. And he's like, you're talking to people every day. You're in a tasting room. You're in the back. Like, there's no one that you interact with that you have an opportunity to just dive a little deeper. And I'm like, I see what you're saying. I'm going to take my lickings and I'm going to figure this out. And was really saying like, okay, I have to start investing. Like, I live here. What is life going to look like in Oregon? And I have been able to develop a community where I can call them at 3:00 in the morning, right? And just say, I really need you right now. Like, great, I'm on my way, right? It's being able to have that and know that you can say anything and there's no judgment, but there's more curiosity of saying, like, why are you feeling that right now? That's empowering, right? To be in that space and to be able to know that you live in a space where you're saying, I don't necessarily feel comfortable all the time. Well, you now have community that's saying, you let me know when you don't feel comfortable and we'll be there.
Yeah.
Right? Like, being able to seek that out and develop that is really special, but I always remind myself of this, and I remind friends of this all the time. Like, if you're feeling scared, do it anyways, right? Because that's where the magic is, right? It's like putting that ego aside, putting that censor aside that's sitting there and it's like telling you that this person's judging you for X, Y, Z. You're telling yourself a story that doesn't exist. Right? Because you don't know the story. At the end of the day, I don't know what you're thinking, right? Like, so rather than worrying about what I think the story is, let's just talk and see what happens, right? Go from there and just stay open to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I could talk for 2 hours about this. But I appreciate it because I have found, like, there's a time, I don't remember when it was, but I think most people have this realization at some point. They're like, wait a minute, I don't have any friends.
Right.
I know a lot of people.
Right.
And there's a lot of people that we could, grab coffee with and
right.
have a nice surface level conversation, maybe go a little bit deeper. But who are those people you can call in the middle of the night?
Right.
Who are those people you can actually be open with about what you're struggling with and not just have to put on a face?
Yeah.
And recognize, like, honestly, for me this year, like, that's kind of a big part of my focus is, like, I want to spend time with people that I care about being around and who care about me. And yes, there's all the business part and all of that.
100%.
But business comes from the relationships again.
Yep.
Again, not to get into all of that, but this is, no, I'm really encouraged by this because it's making me think again. There's not BBC. There's a podcast series called, I think it's called How to Talk to People. And I was like, oh, I need that.
Yeah.
But a big part of it was how to create community. And you have to sometimes be the first one to take those steps. And sometimes people aren't looking for it.
Yeah.
And they're a little put off. Like, what do you mean you want us to come over to your house? Like, we don't do that.
100%. 100%.
And not taking that as a rejection, but wow, this is just something we all, like, it's going to take us as individuals doing that and reaching out to people and creating that. So I know we're talking about our legacy harvested, but a lot of this, I mean, it's kind of, I'll let you explain. What is your hope for the future of this organization? Do you see it staying, I mean, the harvesting part, obviously it has to do with wine.
Right.
But in many ways you're putting forward a philosophy, it seems. And maybe I'm just reading into that because
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's just, I always like to say it's a reminder of society, right? Like, I'm doing the thing that people do, right? I know that I like being a connector. I know that I like connecting people. If I know somebody that is in a field that you're curious about, if I know somebody that works at a place that you've been like, I've wanted to check that place out. I got a friend that works there. Let me connect you guys. You'll have a great time. You know what I mean? I love being able to do that because, again, it's seeing the joy for you means everything to me, right? Because it's like, now my hope is that you pay that forward because now that lives in you and saying, like, my friend or this person that I don't know that well decided to connect me with their people, trusted me enough to connect us. Wow, it's that easy. All she had to do was text. And and this relationship has now developed. How can we keep passing that forward? I always say it's a chain reaction, right? And my hope is that it always resonates in people to just keep pushing it forward. Not what would Tiquette do? No. What would you do? Instinctively, you would do it, right? It's like, if this is the person you're like, yeah, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling nice. You know, let me do this. That's all I want.
Yeah.
You know, it's like really just for us to look out for each other. I always say it's like, it's not my business whatever you have to say about me behind my back, right? But you are my business in community. I am going to make sure that you are okay. Like, we are each other's business.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that that's always my thing. It's if I'm seeing something and I'm like, that person is looking physically uncomfortable right now. Like, you just make sure they know that I'm in the space, right? Like, they know that someone is seeing them, right? And if they need to come over, they can come to this space. How are we looking out for each other? How are we being each other's business?
Yeah.
Right? Like, and I'm not talking about the gossip. Like, I'm talking about like how can we support each other? How can we look out for each other? If you see your neighbor struggling to do something, or struggling to get the garbage can, or struggling to get something down from the roof, like, are you just looking out the window or waiting for them to fall to see what happens? Or are you popping out and being like, do you need help? Like, I can hop over and help you. I got a ladder. Like, what can you do to be of service of your community?
Yeah. I know we have to end, but I'm going to keep going anyway. This is bad. You know, one of the interesting things with that is many people feel, oh, I don't want to, like, if someone says, oh, do you need any help? The immediate response is, no, I'm good.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to owe someone anything.
100%.
And that's like, and I feel that too.
Yeah.
And it's hard when there's not already that sense of community to say like, yeah, I know, but how can we, it's vulnerable.
Yeah.
To accept something. It's actually more vulnerable, I think, to be willing to accept help than to offer it. It's really easy to offer it because you're now like, it's kind of like a power dynamic. I know that sounds weird.
It's ego. Ego's a tricky thing. Like, you know what I mean? Ego tells us stories, right? In our minds all the time of saying like what you just said. Oh, if I accept this help, like, am I going to look weak in this moment? Mm-hmm. Am I going to look like I can't support my family? Am I going to look like I can't support myself?
Yeah.
Right.
And I think for me personally, it's like, oh, now I owe them something. I have to do like, they're going to be expecting something from me, and am I going to like disappoint them? Right. And it's like just being able to accept it. But relationships are like that constant, like serving someone, helping them, and then being able to receive it.
It's not a scoreboard.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, the universe always brings it back in time, right? There is going to be a moment that is going to be presented where you have the opportunity to give something back. The question is, do you rise to the occasion, right? Like, it will present itself.
Yeah.
And if you miss it, sometimes it keeps circling back in different ways, right? And that's where we as the person have to pay attention to when that moment arises. Because at one point, you're going to be like, you know, the same thing happened a few months ago or a year ago, and like, it keeps happening. Yeah, because everybody's like, you haven't figured it out yet. Like, you know, like, we're trying to help you figure it out. Here's the moment. Yeah. Right? And I think it's such a thing. It's such a tool that we all have, and like we all say it, right? Where, oh, I don't want this person to feel like uncomfortable helping me, and I don't want to put them out. And it's very easy to think that. But also they're offering, right? And it's like, that's the thing. It's like, I always tell people, I'm like, I'm not going to offer something I don't want to do. You know, so.
And maybe that's something too, is don't offer something if you don't mean it. Like,
100%.
Why did you accept that?
Exactly. And so that's always my thing. I'm like, everything that I step into, I don't do it for applause. Right? I'm not doing it for the accolades. If I am, then I'm really in it for the wrong reason. Right? And that is going to lead to something that ultimately I don't want, right? I think it's something where if you're coming into these spaces open and honest, people will receive it or they won't, and that's okay, right? I always say, like, as long as you're willing to have a conversation or just be in the room with me, we're good. Like, we can have a debate. We can disagree on things, absolutely. But you know what? You're still my business. Like, like, it's just, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I know we do need to wrap up. Almost last question. Okay. How can the community get involved with Our Legacy Harvested?
I mean, for us, the biggest thing is housing and supporting our students. The reason why we're only able to take the amount of students that we are is because it's what we're able to financially support. So we get close to 80 applicants every year wanting to be a part of the program, and we can only take 5. So yeah, each student costs about $10,000 for everything that we cover, because we do transportation, so flying them out here, we cover their housing, and then we cover their educational experiences, and we provide them a vehicle while they're here.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're trying to take a lot of the financial burden off of them while they're here, because we recognize being in Harvest is a privilege in that space. Like, you are taking a pay cut from your normal 9 to 5. So how can we alleviate some of that pressure where you're not going to be working and receiving that normal income for these next 4 months if you're supporting family back home? And so I think the biggest thing for us is, like, we're always looking for community support and whatever donations people are willing to give. We always say, like, if you have a vehicle that you're able to loan and we can have some sort of a rental program with you, like, phenomenal. Somewhere for our students to stay. We ideally like them to stay together, because we like them to be able to come together at the end of the day and be able to share their experiences and say, this is what I experienced at my winery, and they can talk about how production facilities run, giving them the chance to have that, but then also know that they're supporting each other in that space and they can come together and have each other's back is a really powerful feeling to have.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so having community surrounding that is always really special.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry I went on that other.
No,
trail.
you're good. You're good.
So many good things. Okay, last question that I ask everyone is, what gives you hope for the future of Newberg? And I guess tying that into the work that you're doing now, what gives you hope for the future, kind of in wine country and Newberg?
Yeah, I think what gives me hope for the future is the conversations that are happening. There's things that I've seen in my neighborhood and I see in friends' neighborhoods and conversations happening that weren't happening 7 years ago. People are engaging with each other differently, and I really love witnessing that. I know that change is hard, especially being in a space that you're having new structures getting built all the time. We're having new wineries being built. Things are always coming in, and it's challenging to watch evolution happen in a space where, it wasn't that 20 years ago, right? And being in the space to acknowledge that, I think, is difficult, because then you also have to look at the landscape of the time that we're in. But I think for me, being able to witness community coming together in really interesting ways and considering that there's still dialogue happening, I think speaks to how passionate people are about the city, right? I think it's a tricky dynamic watching the generational clashes and watching people moving into a place where there's a lot of institutional knowledge that not always being acknowledged, and people struggling with that, but still being able to sit there and say, like, I understand that this is how it was, but we are evolving and we're trying to figure out what this city is going to look like. I think now that people are trying to figure out how to have that conversation is really powerful. And witnessing that in wine country and witnessing that in Newberg, I think is really special. I always tell people it takes a lot of sandpaper to find beautiful stones. So being able to have these moments and being able to have the debates, I think are really powerful. And I think, we all just have to figure out how to come to the middle, and we're working on that, right? And I think as long as we keep working on it, the city will be amazing. Because it's on to special things. It is. I mean, you watch the things that are happening and how people are trying to grow and evolve and change. And, I think conversation needs to keep happening. It can't just be one way or the other. You have to find the middle. You have to.
Tiquette, thank you so much. It's so fun talking to you. I wish we could talk for more, but we'll cut it off here. I appreciate you and all that you're doing. Talking to you gives me hope.
Oh, thank you so much. So you're going to make me cry.
Thank you for tuning in to the Giving Town podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend who you think might benefit from hearing it. While more and more people are continuing to hear about this podcast, I still need your help to spread the message about all the people and organizations that make Newberg so great. Well, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next episode.